hang on.
Okay, Tonya, use the, you see the clicker?
Mm-hmm.
So Jane's going to turn it on, your PowerPoint. And then when you get through with that one and you're ready for your final one, double click and it will bring up your final video.
Okay, I may forget that.
I'll help
you. It's crazy. So I'm going to get emotional before I start. And it's really interesting and humbling to be here because my children actually went to preschool here. So it was a wonderful time for them years and years ago. So we'll start by, one of the things that I did, and I'm sure we all do, is we kind of go to prayers or go to scripture or go to uplifting things when you're going through a really difficult time. So the only way to know strong faith is to endure great trials. I am not going to cry out. That was just, you know, I had learned my faith by standing through the severe test. I know a long time ago, people could maybe ask me, you know, what's the worst thing that, you know, that could ever happen? And never, never, never in my life could I imagine, well, what did occur? In fact, one kind of funny is, I have a really good friend, and I know it's meant to be a compliment, and she says that every time she feels really bad about her life, she just thinks about mine, and it makes her feel much better. So I said, I'm glad I can do that for you. So, one of the things, and I should have brought it, I have a cross. So during everything that was going on, one of the things that I had to try to cling to were just words and hope and things. And so a friend of mine kind of designed this cross, and it had the word truth this way on the cross. Well, as it went along, we actually created a cross that had truth this way and justice down this way. And that is something that in my private life and in my professional life, I am an attorney now. I hope that I do things. There are really good attorneys out there, but there are jokes about attorneys for a really good reason. So I do hope that I do what I should do, because I want truth and justice to intersect. I don't want it to be independent. I don't play games with cases that I work on. I think that truth is very, very important. So, as she said, on May 30th, it was me, and you can kind of like, time-wise, kind of keep me in, because once I get started, it may be long. On May 30th, it was the first day of summer, and my kids and I were running around. We were going to go to the community swimming pool. My son had a friend over. Life was just, it was great. And so the doorbell rang. And I think the kids did, for the first time ever, did not open the door and came and told me there was somebody at the door. So I didn't think anything about it. I opened the door. There were two, I would say police officers, but detectives, because they were plain clothes, but they had a gun and a badge. And I closed the door, and I kind of, you know, obviously I was confused. The kids had their little faces like planted against the windows, and they said, "We need to talk to you about something." And I said, "Okay." And they said, "We need to talk to you about some kids, you know, you teach at the school." And I said, "Yeah," and I didn't think much about it. And then my daughter had kind of had a little altercation with another little girl at one point, and he said, "Well, you know, it's about, you know, two girls." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, that's been taken care of." And then all of a sudden he said, "So it's been taken care of that you molested these girls?" And of course, at that point, I was very much in shock, and I just said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And so he said, then they kind of started I hate to say it, but it's like on TV. Does anybody here like have that obsession with Law and Order like I do? Because I do. And so they started that good cop, bad cop thing. One was like, "Well, you just need to talk to us," and the other was like, "You know, you're going to go to prison. You know you did this." And I really had no idea. I was just in shock. The kids were knocking on the window because they were trying to figure out what was going on. And at this point, I could probably talk this whole time about that one day, because it was chaos. My children and I, their father and I, weren't married anymore, and it was his weekend. when I called my mom, because so the detectives, you know, they ended up saying, you need to come talk to us. And I said, I will come talk to you. I need to get my kids taken care of, and I will come talk to you with an attorney. And of course, then they started the whole, then you must be guilty. Nobody would ask to have an attorney. Again, I'm not even lying. It was Law and Order. I just kept like visualizing that in my head. And so they left. I called my mom, and I called the little boy that was over there. I called his mother. And they both thought, I couldn't talk, and they both thought that one of the kids had died or that there was a really bad accident. So both of them got in the car and just came to the house. So I'm trying to like figure out what's going on. I did what a lot of people that call our office do. I didn't have an attorney on speed dial. I knew some attorneys from our divorce and things. So I got on the phone and I called an attorney that my friend that was coming, she had used for her divorce. So I called and said, oh my God, there's these detectives, what's going on? I don't know. So he said, let me figure this out. So in this process, I'm trying to get the kids ready and get them to go with their dad, or go to their dads, and my parents were gonna take them to my dad's, to their fathers, I'm sorry. And so during all this, of course the kids are really confused. And they're like, what's going on? And all I told them, because, well, the prosecutors tried to make a big deal out of everything. But all I told them is this is a very adult situation, and we'll figure this out, but it's an adult situation, I'm not going to talk to you about it. And so my dad comes, he gets the kids. It's so weird because like I go with my life and we do all this stuff with the cases, and the emotions are just very raw every time. So the kids get in with my dad. And I was so busy trying to figure out what was going on and talk to the attorney that I didn't hug him when I did. I didn't tell him I love him. And so I didn't realize that I may never see him again. And that day, I just kept, for 2 years while this was going on, I just kept, like, why didn't I tell him I love him? I'll probably take my glasses off. Why didn't I hug them? But they drove off. And when they drove off, I never in my life thought that anybody could ever be arrested if they didn't do something wrong, if they didn't commit a crime. And I thought, you know what? My friends came over. We had a meeting, a prayer meeting of my close friends, because I knew with me being a female and being a teacher and things that it would probably be on the news. I wanted everybody to hear before me in case something happened. But we were still convinced you can't be arrested if you did anything wrong, if you didn't do anything wrong. So they came over, we prayed. I left that night, I left my house and went to stay with a friend, because Monday I was supposed to go do a polygraph. I had all this stuff scheduled, and I just knew it was going to be okay and it was going to work out. So again, I took a change of clothes, and I thought everything's going to be resolved. Well, it ended up that this is a weird question. Has anybody here taken a polygraph? It's very uncomfortable. I mean, it's just uncomfortable if you're just kind of taking it just to take it for random reasons. But I didn't care. I said, I will take a polygraph. I did nothing wrong. So we had a polygraph scheduled with law enforcement, which I would not suggest that. Hopefully nobody will ever need to use that advice. But, so I was in the car, and I was staying with a wonderful friend of mine, and my attorney called me and said, don't come. He said they weren't going to let you take a polygraph. He said they have the news cameras here. They have a warrant for your arrest. All they want to do is when you got out of the car, they wanted to basically throw you down, handcuff you, and get it on the news and get it on the TV. So at that point, obviously, at my friend's house, I just fell on the floor. I mean, and it was, the arrest was May 11th. It was, I'm sorry, that should be June 11th. That's incorrect. So it was the day after my son's birthday. And the day before, my friend and I prayed, we talked, we cried, and I said, today's my son's birthday, but I'll get to see him tomorrow. And so the arrest took place on May 11th. I really liked this saying by Rosa Parks. It said, at the time I was arrested, I had no idea it would turn into this. It was just a day just like any other day. The only thing that made it significant was that the masses of people joined in. And I will say, one of the things that the attorney, that I will say, the first attorney I fired in like 3 weeks, but he did say one thing that was really, really true. And he said, you're going to know who your friends are. You know, in times like this, you're not going to question. So the support, the prayers, there's no way that I could have gotten through anything without that. So I went ahead and said, look, I didn't do anything wrong. I changed attorneys. I said, I want to take a polygraph. And so we found a polygraph that he's an international polygraph examiner. He worked with the FBI for years and years and years. I went and took 2 polygraphs with him, passed both of them. And of course, what do you think they said when we presented that? We are so narcissistic that you falsely passed the polygraph. So, which is fine. I did it as much for me as I did for anything else. Now, the funny thing is that this was in North Georgia, of course, and they said that they didn't trust his polygraph results. They wanted the local little North Georgia polygraph guy. Well, my guy trained their guy. So, I don't really understand that, but so that, you know, it meant nothing legally, but it meant a lot to me. It gave me some validation. At this point, it was all over the news. It was in the newspaper, it was on talk radio, it was all over the news. And I didn't want to go anywhere. I mean, I was, and the church that I had gone to for years and years and years, they were wonderful. I didn't want to go to church. I felt like people were going to, you know, grab their kids and run, and it was just horrifying. Then I get called into the school, and now none of the allegations occurred at the school. It was at the house my daughter had a sleepover. So they called me in, and I mean, I will say, I was extremely disappointed in how the school handled it. I understand with the accusations that you would need to say, look, you don't need to be in the classroom until this is worked out. So they said to me, either you can resign or you're going to be terminated. And at that point, that had been about 2 months in. And I realized very quickly the legal system is just not what I thought it was. I was very naive. I didn't realize that deposition, know what depositions are? Probably most people know what those are. You can't do those in criminal cases. You can't get any information. If you send an investigator out to talk to people, they're not going to talk to you if they're from what, quote unquote, the other side. So when she said you're going to be terminated, she said you're going to be terminated or you can resign, and of course she said, well, it's going to be really embarrassing for you if you have to have a termination hearing, so I think it would be best for you to resign. And I said, I didn't do one thing wrong. I will not resign. I won't do anything that is indicative that I did something wrong. So we'll have a termination hearing. I'm not going to resign. So we had a termination hearing. It turned into chaos. There were probably, the media was there. There were probably 40 Georgia State Patrol there. And I learned very, very quickly. And this was out at Chickamauga Elementary. So I don't know how familiar y'all are with that system, but it's just the elementary school, Gordley Middle, and Gordley High School, and that's the whole school system. And there was a, you know, like a building where the administration was. So they would ask, when you walked in the door, like if you walked in the door, they would say, are you for or against Tonya? And if you were for me, you just had to figure things out. If you were against me, they had a special room set up with refreshments and whatever. And so I learned real quick that this wasn't going, that, you know, whether it be personal or not, there was an issue, and it was, I definitely wasn't the popular individual there. But the other interesting thing is, like, people that I knew, people that I didn't know, they came and they surrounded this entire building in the circle, and they were all partying the whole time. And so, it was so humbling. I went into the termination hearing. We had subpoenaed some people because we should be able to ask questions. They didn't show up. Nothing happened to them. But they, the board went in and deliberated, and they deliberated, I think, for about 45 seconds, and of course terminated me. Which even then, like, they had pictures, I cried. I mean, I knew it was going to happen, but it was it was very hurtful. I had been teaching for a little less than 20 years. I love teaching, and I think in a weird, not in a weird way, I knew that was the end of my teaching career, even though I didn't I just knew deep down that I would never teach again in a school setting. So there were all kinds of things happening now. This is kind of how I describe this situation. And when people come to me and they're falsely accused, this is kind of how I tell them it's going to be. When you first learn about this, it's like a tornado. And when you first learn about it, it's like you're walking through that wall of it. And it's chaos, and things are hitting you, and you're being thrown around, and it's absolute and utter chaos. And then you get in the middle of it, to where there's still stuff going all around you, but there's a little bit of calmness. Every now and then you get smacked with something, but you're in the middle. When you go to the trial, that's when you have to go through the other side. And a lot of people, and I know I felt the same way, I thought I wanted that trial until you step in there that first day. And you look at 12 people and you know that they're going to decide if you spend the rest of your life in prison or not. So there were all kinds of crazy things going on. I had an order where I couldn't see my kids. And I went in for bond modification after bond modification to try to see my kids. My attorneys kept telling me, you're not going to be able to see your kids. Basically, it's futile to do it. And I said, I don't care, because one day I want my kids to know that I did everything I could to try to see them. If I had to be supervised, if I had to have 10 people and cameras, I didn't care. But it was denied, and it was denied, and it was denied. There was a day, I'll use the cleaner version. So, I went for a bond modification, hadn't seen the kids in 6 months. And we went, and the judge took a day or two, and my attorney called me. And he said, hey, I want to tell you something. You got some good news and bad news. And I said, okay. And they said, the good news is that you get to see Cole, my son, for 24 hours once a month, supervised with 2 people, which in a way is terrible, but it was wonderful. He said, but you can't see 8, your daughters. So of course, I started crying. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And so Scott said, Tonya, which if he was here, we work on cases together now. And if he was here, he would tell you that he runs from me. He said, listen, you should be happy because you got half of what you wanted. And I kind of use illustrations a lot. And I was, if I said, how would you feel if you couldn't see one of your kids? A male just doesn't get that. So I did say, I said, listen, I tell you what, Scott, I'm going to get in my car, I'm going to drive to Atlanta, I'm going to get a knife, and I'm going to cut one of your thingies off. And when I do that, and you get mad, I'm going to say, well, you should be happy because you still have one left. So to this day, he'll be like, okay, Tonya, I'm like, don't you say that again. So even though now, I think that's very funny, back then I was serious as a heart attack. I'm like, I've got it in my hand, like, here I come. But, so things kind of started, it was kind of like chaos, because in Tennessee, which was where the kid's dad lived, this was in Georgia. So every year we had a custody thing going on in Tennessee. We had the criminal case going on in Georgia. So I felt like I was in a courthouse every single day. In the midst of this, David, which is my husband now, and I'll give you a little sneak peek. So we've been married almost 16 years now. But when all this started, we had not even been married a full year. We had kind of had a little bit of a separation before any of this started. He'd been single his whole life. He wasn't ready for a family that he thought he was, and I was very selfish and said, this is our life. Either you fit into it, or go, or there's the door. So he went ahead when I got arrested and filed for a divorce. And so I was dealing with ex-husband in custody, criminal case in Georgia, and then current husband who just jumps ship and runs. And it was a lot. And if it was somebody else's life, I would say there's no way I could ever deal with that. Having said that, after I had my emotions, I stepped back and I figured, okay, you know what? In this divorce with him, we can do some depositions that can be helpful for this case. So I had to, it was kind of like a roller coaster. I'd be super, super upset, wouldn't get out of bed for days, and then I would get up and say, no, I'm good. And honestly, I fought for 2 reasons. That's call it a. I mean, I fought for the kids, and that's what kept me going. And so I get out of the bed and say, okay, now what do I do? You know what? If he wants to divorce me, then I want to use it, and we're going to get some depositions. So that's David and I, and Carrie's on the right side. He was one of my attorneys. Scott, the one I was talking about, is the one with his head down. See, he's small as that ain't. He's like, I'm getting away from Tonya. I'm just kidding. But and so Doc, the one with the mustache, he's an attorney that is the smartest man I've ever met, but he is probably this, I've said this to him, I don't respect him personally, but I have the greatest respect for him professionally. And he was a child psychologist and he was an attorney. But the blessing in the middle of this mayhem I was talking, we do our depositions. I hadn't seen David. I mean, from the arrest, the day that the detectives came to my house, they said, we've even talked to your husband, and he says he thinks you did this. And I'm like, I mean, 2 days before he said he was going to move back in, and we were going to go to counseling. So of course I call him and I call him. He never answered his phone. I never heard from him. The next I heard, there were divorce papers. So, and I don't know who has watched Bruce Almighty. Y'all remember that? And I don't know if you remember this scene, but there's a scene. You know, he's God, and he can see her, and she's in her bed, and she's sitting there and she's crying, and she's saying, "Please, God, just let me not love him anymore." And I mean, I was literally living in a motorhome in my friend's driveway, and I would just do that. I would say, I didn't even want to hate him. I just didn't want to love him. I wanted to let him go because I had too much stuff. So we went to a deposition. He was there. I had decided I was going to tell him how I felt. So after the deposition, I said, "Hey, David, can we talk in a room?" And of course, all the attorneys are like, "Oh my gosh, she's going to kill him. Please don't put him in the room together." And I wrote down what I had to say, just where I, made sure that I said everything. And I basically said to him, "I love you. I don't want a divorce, but if you want," because what we did was I asked for like 30 grand a month, just to where he didn't agree with it, where we could get the depositions. So I knew he wouldn't do that. So that wasn't going to be a problem. But I went in there and I said, "Look, you can have anything you want." I said, "You can have any furniture, you can have any ring, you can have anything you want." And I said, "I love you. I don't want this to end." I had to drag this out for me and for the kids. I'm fighting. I'm doing everything I can, but I'm done fighting with this. I can't do this anymore. If you want a divorce, I'll sign the papers and you can have whatever. He was kind of in shock. I was kind of in shock. We left. Nothing was resolved. And I was kind of mad because, I'm like, I've been going through all this. You hadn't called me one time to see if I was okay. And then you don't say anything. I mean, I'm like pouring my heart out. And so I'm kind of like, you know what, God, good riddance to him. So about a week passed and I hadn't heard from him. And so I was really praying about it. And my friend that I was in the car with, we went to the gym to work out. And if she'd known what I was thinking, she would have dragged me out of that car. So I'm sitting there, and I know that y'all know this. So when you have this conversation with God, like some people would think you're schizophrenic or something if they could be in your head. So because you're like arguing. So I felt like that God was telling me, "You need to call David." And of course in my mind, I'm like, I'm not calling David. I just told him all that stuff and poured my heart out, and I was nice to him, and he didn't call him. Like, I'm not calling David. And so then I really felt like, you need to call David. And then I was like negotiating with God. I mean, y'all know that, right? And I was like, I'll tell you what, I'll call him by Friday. If I still feel led by Friday, I'll call him. And I really felt like, you need to call him. You need to call him today. And I even went through the whole, I'll send him a text. That's good. And I really felt like being told, you need to call him. And then I told my friend, I said, "I'll be inside in a minute." And I was like, fine, have your way. Just have your way. I'll call him. So I picked up the phone. Jennifer went to the gym. I called him and it rang. I thought, good. I'll just leave a message. And so he picked up the phone. And of course, he picked up the phone, really awkward on both of our parts. It's kind of like, oh, hey. So we decided to meet and to sit down and talk. We reconciled. That was 13 years ago, 14 years ago, long time. But the funny thing, not the funny, but God thing, is that when David told me about that, he said, and he kind of praised that, he's not as like, I drug him, Trace Diaz, you know what Trace Diaz is? Love it. I drug him to that, and he gets there, and we dump him in the middle of somewhere, and he can't have his phone, and they take his watch, and he's like, oh my gosh, where am I? But he said that morning that I called him, he got up, and he said that he was late to work, which he never is, and he just prayed, and he was like, you know what, God, if Tonya and I are supposed to be together, have her call me today. And he said, I'm telling anybody that doesn't believe, and he said that he prayed and said, I don't want a text, I don't want a voicemail, if she has to call by the end of today or I know we're done. And that was the same day. So it was just so much divine intervention in that. And that's why that is a blessing in the middle of mayhem, because there were so few blessings that it was just heartwarming to at least have one every now and then. Okay, we talked about Scott and his body parts, so we'll do that again. So that's me and Cole. That's actually me and Cole. And like I said, I did get to see him a little bit. It was supervised, and then my ex started to try to say stuff about my mom too. So then they had to be, so we had like 4 supervisors. We had a supervisor, then a supervisor supervising the supervisor. But when we went to court, we had dozens of people that said, we'll do it. And I think they thought it would get worn down and people just wouldn't want to be involved, because that is what happens a lot. But it was just amazing how little things that used to just kind of be, I loved reading to my kids, but sometimes you're tired and you're like, okay. Well, it definitely changed my perspective on that. This was actually the rooms, and with my daughter, there was no contact. I couldn't talk to her, I couldn't see her. I even tried to ask to write letters or anything, and they could go through the judge or whoever, and it was denied. And on January 17th, that's her birthday, and I couldn't sleep, and I sat down, and I wrote her a letter. And I wrote her a letter because I've researched these cases, and when you have these kind of allegations, they're horrible, and if they happen, I hope you rot in prison. If you do anything to a kid, go to prison, you deserve it. But I also knew that it's just such an emotionally charged thing that there are, the conviction rate's about 99%, 98%. So I wrote her a letter like I wasn't going to ever see her again, and somebody could give it to her when she turned 18 years old, just to say that I loved her. And and I didn't want, like Cole and Aiden, I didn't want them to be angry towards each other, and I wrote Cole one as well. So I hung on to that letter that whole time. That's kind of part of my thing too, is I like to write, and my master's is a literacy specialist, so that's kind of a way that I either get on the treadmill or I go write. So with the information highway here, so here's what happened, is I had a private investigator. So if anybody's ever used a private investigator for anything, you probably don't want to raise your hand. Usually they're for seeing if somebody's doing something else supposed to be doing. But I had this private investigator, and he's going and talking to people. And we're in North Georgia. Actually, we're in Chickamauga. Well, Chickamauga is not super diverse. So my private investigator is black. Well, it got to the point to where if he was driving in Chickamauga, people would call and say, hey, Tonya's PI's in town. we saw him. And so it got pretty aggressive. So he went to serve somebody papers, and he got hit in the face. And they ended up arresting him for this person hitting him in the face. So they said that they wouldn't let him out on bond unless he agreed to not work on my case. So at this point, I'm like, I can't even. So I tried to find other private investigators, and what would you have said? They said, I'm not working for you. I'm not getting arrested. They're crazy up there. They're like, I'm not going to North Georgia. So, and having said that, I have wonderful friends there. But I couldn't find a private investigator to work for me. So then I finally just put on my little traveling pants and I flew to California and I showed up at the Attorney General's office and talked to him because he, the McMartin case, which probably a lot of y'all are aware of, he began an investigation into that. I wanted to know what caused him to say there are red flags. I went to these places plus more. If there was a number or a name or anything that came up in the investigation that we had any questions about, I got on the plane or got in the car and off I went to see if we could get any information. My attorneys I finally said, you know what, Tonya, you're going to do whatever you're going to do, just don't get arrested in any of these states. I said, okay, I'll try not to. So one of the things that we were able to do is do a deposition of the therapist. Well, she was the CAC, that's the Child Advocacy Center. She was a therapist there. Well, I found a lot of information on her. I actually went and got a divorce file about this big. A little mad because my attorneys hadn't found it yet. But she had been diagnosed with this severe mental illness, mental health issues and stuff, to the point to where she wasn't supposed to be providing therapy for anybody. And it was so bad that the Tennessee courts said that any of her findings on my kids were invalid and not credible, and that she got a no contact order with my kids. But she was still providing therapy for the other 2 children involved in this. Every now and then I'll throw in these different things, sayings. There was scripture. I had stuff posted all over the walls everywhere that I was. Oh, and one other little thing is when David and I did get back together, I did get to move out of the motorhome and had a house. I look back now and I said I was living in a motorhome, lost my job, lost my kids, lost my life, and I had my 2 dogs. I said it was a country song gone really, really, really bad. But now things are looking up. Well, that was just. So that was obviously when the kids were little, and you know, birthdays went by, Mother's Days went by, Christmas went by, and there just wasn't, you know, you can't see your kids. It was, I may have one, we talked about that. I may have a slide in here. If I do, I'll skip it. It was Christmas, and I'm sitting there, and I can't even remember. We probably put up a tree. I'm sure we did because Cole could come occasionally. And I'm just looking at this Christmas tree, and I'm looking at the kids' bedrooms, and I'm just thinking, everybody gets convicted on it. Like, there's no hope. I mean, you know, you just think, and you know the book, I guess, or poem or whatever, The Night Before Christmas? Well, I took it, and I love to write poems. And I sent it to a bunch of people. And I used that same outline and wrote this poem about kind of hearing something and going outside and you think it's the kids, and you know, you just sit there and you look at this tree. And I used to love Christmas. I used to love, you know, them being excited, and it turned into just this horrible thing. I mean, the holidays when people are going through rough stuff, it's so fun and it's exciting, but sometimes we forget just what some people are going through and how very sad it is for them. Let's see here. So there was a judge on the case. Just all these little different things that I was finding out along the way, and some of it I didn't find out till after the fact. Like one fun fact, I'll call it, is a different judge that decided if I could see my kids. Well, you know, the therapist I was talking about, her name, I'll just say Lori, her name was Lori. She was sleeping with the judge as she was testifying, saying no, she shouldn't see her kids. And I'm like, can we not do anything about this? Brian House took over the case. I will say, my next book that I'm writing, I'm signing for, is How to Not Pick a Husband. I'm not really good at that, okay? I got married right out of high school to my high school sweetheart. It didn't work. We're really good friends now. It's not the kid's father. And so when he and I got divorced, Brian House was his divorce attorney. So we filed a motion to recuse. And of course, Brian decided that he didn't need to recuse himself, even though it was a pretty contentious divorce. He should have. Legally, he should have, but he didn't. That's why when people come to us about cases and they're like, you can't do this. I'm like, well, you're not supposed to, but they can do whatever they want to do. One of the things that I finally did is my face was all over the news, it was all over the paper, it was all over everywhere. And so when I went and met with the AG in California, and he actually wrote one of the little excerpts for the book, he said, let me tell you, Tonya, he said, this sounds crazy, it sounds like a witch hunt. He said, when I was a prosecutor, he said, you've been all over the media, they bashed you. He said, so if I were you and I didn't do anything wrong, I'd go jump up and down and say, my goodness, I have something to say. So you can imagine how much my attorneys loved that. When I came back and said, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this interview, and you're going to be there in case I say something stupid. So I did. I said, all this stuff's being reported about me. Things are being said. I have nothing to hide, and it is very, very, very against attorneys' rules for somebody before a trial to speak out for obvious reasons. But I didn't care, and I loved my attorneys and I listened to them, but I did what I felt like I needed to do. They did give me a lot of guidance, and now we work on cases together, so they like me a little bit, I guess. Let's see, we can skip this. Okay, so we fast forward, and we have, this has been 2 years. From the arrest to the trial was 2 years. When people come in, and if they've been falsely accused, and I'll let y'all ask some questions later, and you can remind me. One of the things that everybody always asks is, how do you know if somebody's, if they're not? We'll deal with that in a little bit, you can ask. But, and you say it's probably going to be 2 years. They're like, no. We need this to get resolved. This shouldn't go on that long. But it needed to for a lot of reasons. And we needed to build the case, and we need to get the team. And that is one thing that I tried to do. I tried to call everywhere in America and find a team of a person that I could call and say, defend me, you can have the experts, you have everybody on your team, and I can just go in the room and lay down and show up at trial. But I couldn't find that. And now I know that God really had me not find it because I built it, and now I'm using that same team that I built to work on cases. Back then, I couldn't see it. Now I can see it, a lot better. So my trial was 5.5 weeks long. That's very, very abnormal, unless it's, some other high-profile cases that we know. So we're in the middle of this trial. It's chaos. People are getting up there, saying stuff. And I will say this. So my ex-husband, the kid's father, he was very involved in this and not in a good way. He testified against me. I kind of wondered how they were going to connect me with girls, because, picking a bad husband, I am heterosexual. And so my ex gets on the stand and comes out with this story that he walked in on me having a lesbian intimate relationship, which never happened. And so, of course, you're sitting here listening to weeks and weeks, and I was livid. And we went to a room, and my attorney, everybody's freaking out. They're like, oh my God, what are we going to do now? I said, well, I think what we should do is we'll go back in there. I will kill him in front of the jury, and then I can go to prison, and at least I did something. So they're like, well, maybe that's not a good idea. But it was, I will say fast forward, and we'll get to that. I've been able to sit down and talk to him, and I said, the first worst day of the trial was when my daughter had to get on the stand. And it was horrible. I couldn't prepare myself for that. I even considered prior to that, I asked the attorneys, I said, I will never say I did something I didn't do, but can I just put me in prison? I don't want my kids to have to go through this. And the other kids too. It wasn't just, they were all victims of the prosecutors and people that didn't do it correctly. But I couldn't do that though. I couldn't protect her. And as a mom, that's the worst feeling in the world that you could have. And to see what she went through was absolutely horrible. But I told my ex, I said, that was the worst day. I said, the second worst day was the father of my children getting up and saying the things that you did that you knew weren't true. And during the trial, it was just, my attorneys would tell you there were ups and downs. There were downs and lower downs to me. There weren't any good parts, I guess. But we get to, I made a lot of decisions during my case. My attorneys, again, I work with them now. They'll tell you good things about me, and sometimes they want to kill me. They probably want to be medicated, but I wasn't. So, but it came to the night before I was supposed to testify, and I was going to be the last witness. And my attorneys sat me down, and they said, "You're not going to testify." And I said, "Oh, yes, I am." And they're like, "The trial's going well, Tonya. You know, you don't need to do that." And I said, "Listen, two things. If I'm sitting on that jury, one, I'm going to wonder what I'm hiding. Like why? What is she hiding that she did, is not going to get up there? And the second thing is, I want that person to look at me and say, I did not do this. I mean, So I said, no, I am. So they made me sign something that essentially said, if I testify and it goes wrong, then they're not responsible. So I broke a door, I think, when I left that. I was not happy. But I had to know when I stood up and they read that verdict for me and my kids that I had done everything I can do. And when I have to make major decisions in my life, I always ask myself, what can I live with the most? And I knew that if I didn't testify, I could never live with it. So I did testify. The trial continues to go on. So we get to the verdict. I didn't put it in here when they read the verdict because there is a gentleman, and he's deceased now, and I hate that. He down in North Georgia, and he literally had the voice of God. I mean, it was like boom when he talked. So he gets out there, and I stand up, and I had a detective, bailiff, I guess. She came over to me, and she was like, okay, they're going to read the verdict. And she said, and I'm standing here, and the judge is up there where it's going to be read. The jury's over here. And she said, if it's guilty, I'm going to have to come and handcuff you and take you out that door. But if it's a not guilty, then you're going to leave out that door. And I remember sitting there thinking, you know how you have all this metaphorically which door you choose? And I literally remember sitting there thinking, this door means freedom, and this door means I go to prison for the rest of my life. And it's just so an out-of-body experience. In church, we're taught not to judge. There's 12 people over there that's their job is to judge and see if I was to go to prison for the rest of my life. It was just so many things that swirl through your mind. So whenever the verdict was in, let's see what thanks to me is that. Okay, that's funny. So whenever the verdict was in, they had me stand up, the jury walks in, and I also knew enough to know there were 22 counts. So he had to read, they had to vote on every single one. I had seen cases where there could be 10 not guilties, 5 hung, and 3 getting, there's all kinds of things. So I knew I had to hear all 22. So we're standing there, and they play it on TV a lot. Whenever I do interviews and stuff, the verdict. And Scott, the one that he was nice to me then. He wasn't scared of me at that point. But he was standing on one side of me, and my attorneys were kind of, the doc was on the other side. But they read, and he said, count number 1. And I'm telling you, if you listen to it, and he says not guilty. I mean, it was the booming. And when that happened, now let me back up 1 second. The courtroom was packed. They locked the doors. You couldn't go in or out. It was lined with Georgia Highway State Patrol. We had to give names to people that were allowed to be, like you had to show their license, your license to get into the courtroom. So there was all of that prior to that. So when they said the first count, everybody in the courtroom was told to not make a sound. Outside, you heard clapping and cheering and wonderful. I mean, and it was really crazy. There were thousands of people everywhere. At that point, too, the national media had gotten involved, so they're all over the place. And so he goes, count number 2 and 3, and he gets to 21, and it was not guilty. And then he reached 22, and when he did, you just, I mean, in the thing, you could see Scott kind of got me because I almost passed out because it was just prepared myself for a guilty to the point where when I was arrested, they took my panties away because they had black polka dots on them. I had the correct underwear. I had a sports bra that had no underwire because they took that. I had a jacket on, the jacket I had there, because it was so cold in the cell when I had been arrested before, and I just didn't want to be cold. I had gotten all my stuff and put it in a deposit box to send to an appellate attorney. I had to mentally prepare myself for the worst. So we have it now. So the Chattanooga Free Press did a story every week. It was 5 weeks long. I didn't even know these people. This is what they put in the Sunday after the verdict. And that was the bailiff telling the judge that I don't think you can overrule a verdict. So every Sunday they had, so I have them at my office, but like one of the cartoons is a steamroller. And the steamroller is like turned over on its side, and the prosecutor has a thing that says Tonya Craft on it. So the media picked up on it. Everybody was picking up on this is craziness. And of course, 1 Corinthians. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. And I know with everything in me that God was there. But I do know that the love for my kids is what kept me from honestly jumping off a bridge. I mean, from just giving up. And the biggest thing too, that when I looked at those two doors before the verdict, I'm not going to say I was at complete peace, because how can you be at complete peace at that moment? But I did know one thing, because I would have wonderful Christian friends, and I loved them, and I didn't even punch them in the face. And they said, it'll be fine, just have enough faith. And I'm sitting there like, it doesn't mean it's going to be fine. And so when I stood there at these two doors, I knew that God was going to go out whichever. If I went that one, he was with me, and if I went that way, he was with me. And that is totally what kept me going. I don't want to go over too far. Let's see. So I'll say this is all of this is over, and then what do you think happens with the kids? Nothing. I have to go file. I have to try to see my kids. I don't get to go after the verdict and go see my kids. So I filed something to be able to see my kids. That turned into a big media thing. My custody hearing was in November. The trial was in May. The custody trial was in November. It was going to be about 3 weeks long. And again, their dad and their stepmom, they were very negatively involved in this, and it wasn't pretty. So we're in the middle of the custody hearing, and we had a break. And I went up to Joel, and I said, listen, can we talk? And again, my attorneys are like, oh my gosh, here she goes again. She's going in a room. She's going to kill him. So we go in a room, and I just said, and one of the things that I've always wanted to also, I said, I want you to look at me and tell me you think I did this. And he looked at me and he said, oh, I knew you didn't do it. I will say this, when I say that, people are like, didn't you want to kill him? But honestly, the weirdest thing I saw, I knew he felt that way. I just wanted to hear it. And it was some validation that sometimes people don't get. And it was the coolest thing in the world, though, because it's like, before that conversation, if I could have looked at him and murdered him, I would have. I mean, I was so angry. And every bit of that anger left. And it was like this forgiveness that, I cared about him. And I cared about their stepmom. And I cared about the main mom that started all this stuff. I mean, I cared about it, and it was weird, but it's so neat, because it was just in a moment. It was like there was this anger, and then bam, it was gone. To the point that we walked out of there, we stood there in front of the camera, got interviewed, and they had us on the Today Show after that, Joel and I, because they were like, wow, they're sitting on the same couch, they're not killing each other. But this is one of the things, because we do some custody work. I'm a mediator, a family mediator, and one of the things is, I don't respect things he did, but I totally respect that he's their dad. And I care about him as their dad. And if I didn't, that's going to eat me up. But it's not going to be good for our kids either. So to this day, and at first people thought it was an emotional thing, that it would be kind of an emotional high and then go away. I go eat lunch with my ex more than I do David. So we go hang out, we go eat lunch. My daughter's birthday was in January. We all went and ate together. So it's really interesting when I have cases or things where they're like, well, you just don't understand what she did. And I'm like, I don't really care. you need to put the child first. Forgiving does not erase the bitter past. A healed memory is not a deleted memory. Instead, forgiving what we cannot forget creates a new way to remember. We change the memory of our past into a hope for our future. And that's the thing, is there is hope. I mean, I never wanted my poor kids to have their little tummies hurt because we were in the same room. And you know, when people come and say, oh, I just have to deal with her till they're 18, you know, you have weddings and you have babies. And I wanted my kids have been through enough. I didn't want them to go through more because I was angry and bitter and ticked off at their father. And we have a super good relationship. He and I took our daughter up to UT and had a great time. So the power of forgetting, that is nothing I could do on my own. Never. If you'd have told me even that morning that I was going to be standing next to him and not trying to like strangle him, I would have said you're crazy. So I will say one of the things, we'll go this quick, is the kids are doing great. My son's 24 now. My daughter's at UT. She's fixing to graduate. She calls me about 14 times a day to tell me every single little thing that's going on in her life. It's been a process. It's been a healing process. And even when I wrote the book, I sat both the kids down and I said, are you okay with this? If you're not okay with this, I'm not going to do it. And so it's been really, really so cool because they've been part of the process too. I'm doing a documentary, and my daughter flew to California and she got to help pick which production company is going to do the documentary. And she's like, this is our story. And she did, after we left some of them, she was like, I don't like them. We're not using them. I was like, okay. and so it's been humbling and wonderful. They know about everything. They ask questions, but if they don't ask questions, I don't sit them down and talk about things. They had a hard time at a certain point with me actually being nice to their dad. They felt like by me being nice to him meant that I was saying everything he did was okay. And I talked to them about that. I said, it doesn't mean that. It just means that instead of me carrying his baggage, I gave it back to him where he had to carry it. And so as far as what I'm doing now, I ended up filing a $22 million lawsuit as soon as it was over. Well, I didn't get any money. I dropped the lawsuit, and here's why. So all of this, we filed the lawsuit like a week after the trial, which was in May, right? So November is when Joel and I sat down and decided we were going to parent together. So, of course, he was named, all of the families were named in the lawsuit, and the prosecutors and the detectives and all these different people. Well, the more I started with the lawsuit, the nastier it got. And, you know, you have to do depositions and these things. And one thing that I learned really, really quick is the only people that really legally you can hold responsible are the families. Because the people that work for the state have this immunity that you just about can't penetrate. In fact, the detective put in his response to my lawsuit, look, I did everything wrong. I didn't do anything I should have done, but I didn't mean to. And guess what? You can't get to it. So I thought about it, and the only people that I could sue are these families. And I felt like these kids had been put through enough, and I wasn't going to put them through anymore. So I just dismissed it all. I had some of my jurors call me angry at me when they saw that it was dropped. I mean, they were real ticked off that I had dropped the lawsuit. But for me, I think there are times for lawsuits. For me, I truly believe that if I did not drop that lawsuit and the years it would have taken and the anger, I would not be sitting here today, and I would not have gotten a law degree, and I would not be helping people and doing what I'm doing. So I don't 1 second regret dropping the lawsuit. I do get some great, that's one of the biggest questions I was like, why did you drop that lawsuit? So obviously I went back to law school, well, that's what so it's in the shape of a cross, and we have it at the office. But that's one of the things that I've tried to hold on to in the cases and what I do. I turn cases away. I've looked at people before and said, I know you did this and I hope you go to prison. And then of course the girls at the office say, he's gonna come back and kill us. Like, let's lock the door. But I just don't play games with people. And I want to know that people to know that if you did anything inappropriate to a child. I interned for 2 years when I was in law school at the DA's office here and worked in child sex crimes because I wanted people to know that I do want to be on the side of truth. That picture actually, my daughter, that was the first time she was back at the house since all of this had started. And then, it's amazing, look at their, you know how they grow up. My goodness, they're so big now. I always tell people that, and I'm sure you've heard it before, that it's not what you go through, it's how you handle it. And I'm not gonna say I've always handled it well, and there were times where I said things I shouldn't have said, and there were many remote controls that I broke because I threw up against the law. But I did try to forgive others. I tried to choose to do the right thing, and you always give God the glory. Because I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for Him. And I want to, oh yeah, I wrote that. God's armor we put on daily adorns not our backside, but our front, not to protect us in retreat, yet in the face of the battle before us. And that's one of the things that I would tell my attorneys when I would do things, is I'm gonna fight, and I'm gonna fight, and I'm gonna fight, until there's nothing else I can do. And I knew when I stood up for that verdict, there's not one thing that I could have done more. I have a little song that I'm supposed to double click.
She's double clicking. Is she going out to the...
Well, I don't.
We're trying.
Yeah.
We're trying to get the sound, Tonya.
It what now?
We're trying to get the sound.
Okay.
It's up over here. I'm good.
Do I have to do it?
Well, it's
Oh, I do need I can put my glasses
it's
back on.
advancing. We're just not getting the sound.
Okay.